and welcome to the channel again. This is Sam, trying to spin to win on Swift. Well, I don't know about you guys, but my legs feel absolutely cooked today. Whew. I didn't sleep that well, unfortunately, and I don't think I've had nearly enough rest to face today's challenge. But we're all in the same boat, so no point complaining about it. We just need to get on with it. And while the legs are definitely suspect, the course today is interesting, and I think the parkour will lead to lots of action. If you're interested in a more detailed description, I did that in the vlog yesterday, so please check that out if that's of interest. But today will be a lot like a boxing match, I think. That is, if you're not quick and nimble, you're gonna take a lot of punches in the face. So, let's get ready to rumble! We will start out the fight today with 2 short sprints to get the legs nicely warmed up. Then towards the end of the first lap, we'll face those 3 really punchy climbs. Hopefully, the peloton is sensible and we rest a bit after that and don't go too hard on the short sprints again on the second lap. We'll then get to the 3 climbs again, and now I think it's going to be absolutely full gas to the finish. And like yesterday's race, if you can stay with the front group through the climbs on the first lap, then chances are you're going to stay with the front all the way until we need to do those climbs again. And even if you get dropped there on one of those climbs, you're not going to lose that much E-gap, because there's not much road left to cover, if you will, until we finish. So that will be my plan for today. Go really hard, try to make sure I stay with the front until the climbs on the second lap, and then just do what I can. But before we get into the action, let's have a quick look at the CRP leaderboard after 6 stages and see if I've made any progress or tiny baby steps again.
This time, there are actually a few changes to note in the top 10. Mr. Daragon has been upgraded to DRA, so he will not feature in CRP category anymore. And I think Mr. Horan, who is currently in second, has joined us from the GHT category. But what has not unfortunately changed is the need for scrolling. I am now in 76th place out of 95 riders who have completed all 6 stages. I took a few small steps in the right direction, but I need a really good finish to the tour to finish in the top half, that's for sure. Okay, time to check out the action and see whether I can land a punch or get knocked out. Ready, fight! As usual, a quick update on my race strategy as we roll out of the gate here. It's actually very similar to yesterday's race in that I will think of the end of the 3rd climb as the finish of my race today, just like I did with the first NYCOM yesterday. If I can, and that is a big if, stay with the front until that point, I should be able to stay with them until we hit Libby Hill for the last time. And even if I get dropped on the final climbs, I should be able to minimize E-gap damage somewhat. Let's hope the legs can execute my master plan again though. We have skipped forward slightly and are now approaching the first sprint. I am not going for sprints in this tour, but inevitably I have to sprint since the speed of the peloton goes up a lot in these segments. And I felt today that would be especially true of the first 2 sprints since they are quite short. So you can see I'm actually moving up towards the front here and even eating some wind in preparation for the sprint, so that I can do a more measured hard effort from the front of the pack rather than an all-out sprint. And then I can also draft as the peloton shoots by towards the end of the sprint. I think a few others also had the same idea. And when the sprint starts proper, I increase my watts a little, and then I see my teammate Stefan fly past like a rocket, and I know it's time to up them once again. But while I still have to push pretty hard, I feel this approach, if you're not going for sprint points that is, saves a bit of energy rather than having to go all out just to stay with the peloton. By the way, Stefan won that sprint, and looking back, I think I saw him produce 17 watts per kilo for a few seconds. Man, that is rapid. We have now skipped forward and are fast approaching the first real climb, Libby Hill. The second sprint followed exactly the same pattern as the first, and Stefan managed to get the fastest time again, I believe. He did tell me afterwards that all of the sprints on the first lap did tire him out a bit. No wonder, given the power figures he had. Wow. So, Libby Hill. As mentioned, my plan was to go all out on the climbs on the first lap, if needed, to make sure I stay with the front group. I am going to let the footage roll here until we get to the top of the final climb, so we can see how I get on. The first part of Libby Hill is relatively flat and draftable, but I am preparing myself for a mad dash on the second part, as this was a sprint segment today. I think I was still doing over 6 watts per kilo for most of the flatter section though, so we were certainly not hanging about. As we turn onto the cobbles, I have to up the power again to stay with the leaders, and I push pretty hard towards the end. But to my surprise, I get over Libby Hill okay, and while tired, I think I could have pushed a bit more if needed. And something to notice for later in the race, nobody pushes on after the climb. Everybody now gets a short rest and the group reforms as we approach the next climb, 23rd Street. This one is short but very steep, so I gather some speed and then it's basically a 25 to 30 second sprint to the top. Everybody else were going really hard here, but again, nobody really pushed at the top. So again, the group reforms. We then get a bit of rest. I certainly needed it. And then we go up the Governor Street climb. This one is not as steep, but it is a bit longer, and your legs are still trying to get rid of the lactic acid from the prior effort. So this is no walk in the park. I was a bit tired at this point, but the peloton kept a pretty hard but measured effort on this climb, probably because it wasn't a sprint segment. As we get to the top, I'm happy for 2 reasons. First, I can now rest for a bit, hopefully at least. But second, I also achieved my main goal of the race, as I think it is now unlikely that I will get dropped until we have to climb again. I have now actually skipped all the way to Libby Hill on the second lap. As I expected, and yes,
I was right!
Nothing much happened in the first 2/3 of the second lap. The pace increased a bit as we seemed to chase a Cat A Domestique for a bit. Not sure what happened there. And we also pushed reasonably hard on the second sprint for some reason. And finally a few people went off the front as we approached the climbs, but the peloton didn't really chase them down. Other than that, it was relatively slow pace. Like me, I'm sure everybody else were resting up for the efforts to come at the end of the lap. And like the first lap, I will roll the footage here until the finish so we can see how I got on these 3 nasty little punchy climbs. So the first section of Libby Hill was not too bad, a bit easier than on lap 1, but I still had to put out decent watts here. As we turn onto the cobbles, however, I make a bit of a mistake. I don't go all out here, but I push quite hard as I'm afraid that people will push on at the top. But if you remember, nobody had done that on the first lap, and the same is true here. Everybody eases off, and the main group reforms again as we rest in preparation for 23rd Street. In hindsight, I could have saved some energy here, which would have helped me at the end. Gustav Lindqvist, who ultimately won the race, messaged me afterwards and asked me that very question. I suppose I was not as smart with my watts as I could have been. And the same can be said for 23rd Street. Here I'm pretty much at the limit to make sure I'm toward the front. But again, nobody pushes on as we go over the top. So again, I probably could have saved some energy here. We all rest until we get to the Governor Street climb. And this time around, as soon as we hit the red section on the minimap, people start pushing hard. This is where I could have used some of the extra energy I wasted, as I start to struggle a bit to stay with the pace, and slowly start to drift backwards. I keep plugging away, but I can't close on the front guys, and I roll over the line just ahead of my teammate Stefan. As mentioned, he was already cooked from his sprint efforts earlier, as otherwise I'm pretty certain he would have beaten me here. At the end of the day, I finished in 14th place, some 18 seconds behind the winner, Gustav Lindqvist. Congratulations to him and the other podium placers, Mr. Brampelman and Mr. Meinik. They clearly had a little left in the tank for the last climb, whereas I was pretty toast by this point. My teammate Stefan finished just behind me, tired from his massive sprint efforts. 16.5 watts per kilo for 5 seconds and 14 watts per kilo for 15 seconds. Man, impressive figures indeed.
All right, some post-race thoughts now that I've gathered myself up from the floor. Well, that was easy, until it wasn't. The race panned out sort of the way I thought it would, in that it would be relatively straightforward, apart from the sprint and the climb segments. And on those, I think we went pretty hard today. On the first lap, I tried to stay ahead of the pack, if you will, for the first 2 sprints, so that I could draft as they went flying past, and I didn't have to go all out on those. Unlike my teammate Stefan, who I think set some fantastic sprint times, especially on the first 2. So well done to him. On the first lap, the climbs went pretty well. I rode hard and steady. In hindsight, I probably rode a little bit too hard because nobody actually pushed on once we crested each of the 3 climbs. So you probably could have gone a little bit slower and still caught up to the front group. But usually that's not the case. So I still think I did the right thing. On the second lap, first time up Libby Hill was okay. Then I went really hard on the 23rd Street climb. Again, probably too hard, but I wanted to make sure I stayed towards the front as we approached the Governor Street climb, just in case there would be a split there. But that effort I paid for on the Governor Street climb. Lost a bit there, but not very much. It was about 17 seconds or so. And as far as EGAP goes, considering my total EGAP, that's nothing. So we'll take that. Overall, yeah, pretty good race. My numbers weren't fantastic, but I rode it the way I wanted to, so I'm pleased with that. Now, we face another ITT, boo, on the Harrogate reverse course tomorrow. But just like the last ITT, this one, the course is pretty bumpy. And I think that, if nothing else, will keep me mentally entertained, if you will, managing all the power increases and decreases to make sure you ride it as efficiently as possible. So, yeah, we're just gonna do our best. Sleep well, eat well, rest and recover, and I hope I'll see you on the start line tomorrow. Bye-bye.
So, stage 8, another ITT, oh no. This time on the Harrogate reverse course. So essentially we're doing stage 4 again, just backwards. I actually like this choice for an ITT course. There are a lot of lumps and bumps, and managing your effort will be key to doing this course efficiently. And as I mentioned earlier, I normally find ITTs extremely boring.
I am unbelievably bored.
But this parkour will hopefully keep me mentally entertained, trying to gauge my effort throughout the race. Swift Insider estimates that a lap will take you the following times, depending on your watts per kilo effort. Since we're doing 2 laps, I suppose we can double that time, so I would suspect it will take us 45 minutes, give or take a few, to get around the 2 laps. As a side note, stage 4 took most races in the CRP GHT category at a little over 40 minutes. But that is of course traveling in a peloton. There is one main segment, and that is the Yorkshire reverse com. It's the same length as the regular com, but it's not as steep. But when you look at the parkour, there are a number of other similar sized climbs on the course. The key will be to work hard on the climbs, but not so hard that you overextend yourself, and then rest on the descents while maintaining high speed. I'm really curious to see how I do on this course. Best of luck to you all, and give me a wave message of support if you see me on the roads tomorrow. I'm gonna need it for sure.